viz. 1542, the injustice, violence, and tyranny of the Spaniards came to the highest degree of extremity, for they had shook hands with and bid adieu to all fear of God and the king, unmindful of themselves in this sad and deplorable condition, for the destructions, cruelties, butcheries, devastations, the demolishing of cities, depredations, etc., which they perpetrated in so many and such ample kingdoms, are such and so great, and strike the minds of men with so great horror, that all we have related before are inconsiderable comparatively to those which have been acted from the year 1518 to 1542, and to this very month of September that we now live, to see the most heavy, grievous, and detestable things are committed, that the rule we laid down before as a maxim might be indisputably verified, to wit, that from the beginning they ran headlong from bad to worse, and were overcome in their diabolical acts and wickedness only by themselves. Thus from the first entrance of the Spaniards into New Spain, which happened on the 18th day of April, in the said month of the year 1518 to 1530, the space of 10 whole years, there was no end or period put to the destruction and slaughters committed by the merciless hands of the sanguinary and bloodthirsty Spaniard in the continent, or space of 450 miles round about Mexico and the adjacent or neighboring parts, which might contain 4 or 5 spacious kingdoms, that neither for magnitude or fertility would give Spain herself the preeminence. This entire region was more populous than Toledo, Seville, Valladolid, Saragossa, and Faventia, and there is not at this day in all of them so many people, nor when they flourished in their greatest height and splendor was there such a number as inhabited that region, which embraceth in its circumference 480 miles. Within these 12 years the Spaniards have destroyed in the said continent, by spears, fire, and sword, computing men, women, youth, and children, above 4 millions of people in these their acquests or conquests, for under that word they mask their cruel actions, or rather those of the Turk himself, which are reported of them, tending to the ruin of the Catholic cause, together with their invasions and unjust wars, contrary to and condemned by divine as well as human laws, nor are they reckoned in this number who perished by their more than Egyptian bondage and usual oppressions. There is no tongue, art, or human knowledge can recite the horrid impieties which these capital enemies to government and all mankind have been guilty of at several times and in several nations, nor can the circumstantial aggravations of some of their wicked acts be unfolded or displayed by any manner of industry, time, or writing. But yet I will say somewhat of every individual particular thing, which this protestation and oath, that I conceive I am not able to comprehend one of 1,000. End of section 8. Section 9 of a brief account of the destruction of the Indies. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Arnie Horton. A brief account of the destruction of the Indies by Bartolome de las Casas. Translator unknown. Section 9 of New Spain in particular. Among other slaughters, this also they perpetrated in the most spacious city of Cholula, which consisted of 30,000 families, all the chief rulers of that region and neighboring places. But first the priests, with their high priest going to meet the Spaniards in pomp and state, and to the end they might give them a more reverential and honorable reception, appointed them to be in the middle of the solemnity, that so being entertained in the apartments of the most powerful and principal noblemen, they might be lodged in the city. The Spaniards presently consult about their slaughter or castigation, as they term it, that they might fill every corner of this region by their cruelties and wicked deeds with terror and consternation. For in all the countries that they came they took this course, that immediately at their first arrival they committed some notorious butcheries, which made those innocent sheep tremble for fear. To this purpose therefore they sent to the governors and nobles of the cities and all places subject unto them, together with their supreme lord, that they should appear before them. And no sooner did they attend in expectation of some capitulation or discourse with the Spanish commander, but they were presently seized upon and detained prisoners before anyone could advertise or give them notice of their captivity. They demanded of them 6,000 Indians to drudge for them in the carriage of their bag and baggage, and as soon as they came, the Spaniards clapped them into the yards belonging to their houses, and there enclosed them all. It was a thing worthy of pity and compassion to behold this wretches people in what a condition they were when they prepared themselves to receive the burthens laid on them by the Spaniards. They came to them naked, their privities only veiled, their shoulders loaden with food, only covered with a net. They laid themselves quietly on the ground, and shrinking in their bodies like poor wretches, exposed themselves to their swords. Thus being all gathered together in their yards, some of the Spaniards armed held the doors to drive them away, if attempting to approach, and others with lances and swords butcher these innocents, so that no one of them escaped. But 2 or 3 days after, some of them, who hid themselves among the dead bodies, being all over besprinkled with blood and gore, presented themselves to the Spaniards, imploring their mercy and the prolongation of their lives, with tears in their eyes, and all imaginable submission. Yet they, not in the least moved with pity or compassion, tore them in pieces. But all the chief governors, who were above 100 in number, were kept bound, whom the captain commanded to be affixed to posts and burnt. Yet the king of the whole country escaped, and betook himself with a train of 30 or 40 gentlemen to a temple, called in their tongue Kuu, which he made use of as a castle or place of defense, and there defended himself a great part of the day. But the Spaniards, who suffered none to escape out of their clutches, especially soldiers, setting fire to the temple, burnt all those that were there enclosed, who break out into these dying words and exclamations: O profligate men, what injury have we done you to occasion our death? Go to Mexico, where our supreme lord Montencuma will revenge our cause upon your persons. And 'tis reported, while the Spaniards were engaged in this tragedy, destroying 6 or 7,000 men, that their commander, with great rejoicing, sang this following air: Miranero de Tarpeia, Roma como se ardía, gritos de niños y viejot, y el de nada se dolía. From the Tarpeian, still Nero espies Rome all in flames, with unrelenting eyes, and hears of young and old the dreadful cries. They also committed a very great butchery in the city Tepera, which was larger and better stored with houses than the former, and here they massacred an incredible number with the point of the sword. Setting sail from Cholula, they steered their course to Mexico, whose king sent his nobles and peers with abundance of presents to meet them by the way, testifying by divers sorts of recreations how grateful their arrival was and acceptable to him. But when they came to a steep hill, his brother went forward to meet them, accompanied with many noblemen, who brought them many gifts in gold, silver, and robes embroidered with gold. And at their entrance into the city, the king himself, carried in a golden litter, together with the whole court, attended them to the palace, prepared for their reception. And that very day, as I was informed by some persons then and there present, by a grand piece of treachery, they took the very great king Montencuma, never so much as dreaming of any such surprise, and put him into the custody of 80 soldiers, and afterward loaded his legs with irons. But all these things being passed over with a light pencil, of which much might be said, one thing I will discover acted by them, that may merit your observation. When the captain arrived at the haven to fight with a Spanish officer who made war against him, and left another with 100 soldiers, more or less as a guard to King Montencuma, it came into their heads that to act somewhat worth remembrance, that the dread of their cruelty might be more and more apprehended and greatly increased. In the interim, all the nobility and commonalty of the city thought of nothing else but how to exhilarate the spirit of their captive king and solace him during his confinement with variety of diversions and recreations, and among the rest this was one, viz., revellings and dances, which they celebrated in all streets and highways by night, and they in their idiom term mirotes, as the islanders do archaitos. To these masks and nocturnal jigs they usually go with all their riches, costly vestments and robes, together with anything that is precious and glorious, being wholly addicted to this humor. Nor is there any greater token among them than this of their extraordinary exultation and rejoicing. The nobles in like manner, and princes of the blood royal, every one according to his degree, exercise these masks and dances in some place adjoining to the house where their king and lord is detained prisoner. Now there were not far from the palace about 2,000 young noblemen, who were the issue of the greatest potentates of the kingdom, and indeed the flowers of the whole nobility of King Montecuma, and a Spanish captain went to visit them with some soldiers, and sent others to the rest of the places in the city where these revellings were kept, under pretense only of being spectators of the solemnity. Now the captain had commanded that at a certain hour appointed they should fall upon these revellers, and he himself, approaching the Indians, very busy at their dancing, said, Sanhago, that is, St. James, it seems that was the word, let us rush in upon them. Which was no sooner heard, but they all began with their naked swords in hand to pierce their tender and naked bodies, and spill their generous and noble blood, till not one of them was left alive on the place, and the rest following his example in other parts, to their inexpressible stupefaction and grief, seized on all these provinces. Nor will the inhabitants, till the general conflagration, ever discontinue the celebration of these festivals, and the lamentation and singing with certain kind of rhymes in their archaitos, the doleful ditty of the calamity and ruin of this seminary of the ancient nobility of the whole kingdom, which was their frequent pride and glory. The Indians, seeing this not to be exampled cruelty and iniquity executed against such a number of guiltless persons, and also bearing with incredible patience the unjust imprisonment of their king, from whom they had an absolute command not to take up arms against the Spaniard, the whole city was suddenly up in arms, fell on the Spaniards, and wounded many of them, the rest hardly escaping, but they, presenting the point of a sword to the king's breast, threatened him with death unless he out of the window commanded them to desist. But the Indians, for the present disobeying the king's mandate, proceeded to the election of a generalissimo, or commander-in-chief, over all their forces, and because that the captain who went to the port returned victor, and brought away a far greater number of Spaniards than he took along with him, there was a cessation of arms for 3 or 4 days, till he re entered the city,